Alrighty, welcome back to Free Read Fridays. I'm your intrepid narrator Fragath, and today we are starting a journey. It's long journey. It's going to be long. This week's will be pretty short for a number of reasons, but the most important reason isn't so much that I don't have time, but because of the way the book is structured. So, spoilers. And I don't think these count as spoilers, by the way, to anyone who's going to be upset at me doing this. The way the book is structured, this first book, the second book is a whole nother can of worms. We're not going to touch on that. That's going to be downright confusing, but we're not worrying about that at this point. Um, it's ironic because it's actually more straightforward than this one is. Basically, Hyperion, the first book of the Hyperion Cantos, which is a two-book duology of Hyperion and the Fall of Hyperion, both by Dan Simmons, the man, the myth, the legend. Um, I say that a lot, so much so that it loses all meaning. Basically, the way it's structured is you'll have uh, we have the introduction, we have uh, current, present day with the cast of characters that we've got, getting to know them, etc. And then we have one of those characters' backstories. And it basically serves as a vignette, a tale. They're called they are labeled as tales within, and it's basically their backstory, the reason why they're where they are right now. Not everything about them will be revealed in these. I don't consider that a spoiler, but it is. They're all pieces to the puzzle that is Hyperion. Um, and then there'll be an interlude or interquel, and then there'll be another character's tale. So basically, the way I'm hoping to structure this out is stream doing whatever stuff, then tale, then interlude stream, then tale, then interlude stream, and so on until the book is done. I think there is it's it's also structured in chapters, which also throws all of that rhythm right into disarray. But we are going to try um, to make it work. The thing is, the interlude bits are very, very short compared to the tales. The tales are like 60 pages a pop. The interludes, maybe 20. Maybe 20 if you're lucky. Some of them are longer. Um, that early on isn't really going to be quite so much. Where are you? And some of them are like practically back to back. Some of the tales, so it's like I think the one between it's like the fourth one that we're doing is going to be it's basically right up against the back of the next one along. The previous one along, rather. So I can't easily do this in chapters because the first chapter is like 80 something pages. 88 pages. There we go. Uh, it's technically just shy that, but still, call it 80 pages. Um, and I can't realistically do that in a single sitting for a number of reasons, mostly because my bladder. Like that's a big one. I would have to take a break in the middle, and I don't think anyone wants to put up with that. Um, Also, like I will start slurring my speech. I will just be exhausted by the end of it. This does take a little bit out of one, and this will be a bit more involved than other ones because there's a lot going on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get through to the beginning of the first tale. I'm going to see what we're looking at for time. If it's been a very short amount of time to do the 20 some odd pages, then I'll be like, okay, let's go. We'll power through, do the first one. I'll have to make sure I change the book cover at some point if I do that. Um, I don't think doing a chapter per stream is going to be practical um, because they are long chapters. They're like 80, again, they're like 80 something pages long. I'm trying to get to how long is that? Yeah, that one's actually not quite as long, but it is like 75 odd pages. Anyway, so that's the basic gist. Each chapter, for the most part, is going to contain uh, interlude or lead up, like actual plot movement and background, a background chapter. Some are going to have more, and then that formula gets thrown off later on in the book, particularly when we get to um, book two, where it's a very different animal. We are going to learn tons of additional backstory, but it's going to be in a rather different way. It also assumes that you've read the previous book. It is a direct follow-up. Um, Hyperion is but the start of the adventure. The very, very, very start. So, yeah, things to expect within Hyperion. You're going to expect the gamut of human conditions. You're going to be able to expect, let's see, some horror, quite a bit. You're going to be able to expect some serious mystery. There's a lot of mystery going on there. You're going to be able to expect a lot of poetry. I did not practice poetry before this, so things are going to be real interesting. Um, but I'm going to fake it. You can expect a cast of like seven-ish major characters at any given time. Minimum six. We can expect a really classy space opera written in the 80s, I think. I think that's when it started, right? First one. Okay, where's the copyright? Come on. Publishing date. There it is. You went right by it. The pages in my volume are extremely thin. Oh, yeah, 89. I, for some reason, thought it was older than that. Um, yeah. So, without additional ado, I guess we'll get cracking on Hyperion, which is the first book of the Hyperion Cantos. Uh, my blather was particularly unfocused today. Oh, yeah, and I do want to pose a question. I have it written in the stream description, but I do want to pose a question to my listeners. This is going to be more for the people listening live, because people not listening live are going to just get, who knows when they're tuning in. They could be tuning in shortly after I do it. They could be tuning in years after the fact. So if you're tuning in years after the fact and you're from the future, hi. Please tell me it gets better. If you're not from the future, and you're from the subjective present, would you prefer I bang out both books of the Hyperion Cantos, which is Hyperion and the Fall of Hyperion, one right after the other? Or would you rather me take a break in between to do any of the other things that I've promised, namely Destination Void by Frank Herbert or The Three Body Problem by Shijin Liu? Either one of those are also on the list. I would very much like to get through uh, those volumes this year. This book, as it is, the combined cantos, is going to take a while. One Chernaya, one Vadova, one is saying, oh, I may have misread that, I apologize, to do both of them one right after the other. And that does make sense because they are direct continuations. Um, I just fear for how long it's going to wind up taking because it's pretty long. But, food for thought. People can lay in Black Widow in Russian. Excellent. Do they even get those in Russia? I thought it would be too cold for them. Parts of it, well, I guess Siberia they wouldn't. But then again, in the spring/summer, Siberia is a hotbed for all kinds of life. Chernaya Vidova. we won't be doing much. Yeah. I'm not going to introduce us to our cast of characters. I'll let the book do that for us. That's going to be because I will be dumb and I will like actually do spoilers, and I don't want to do that. Like just by accident because I have read these before. Generally, when I am reading a book aloud, with few exceptions, and I'll try to make note of them, it's something that I've read before, and basically in one form or another have vetted. Um, Thing is, sometimes it has been many years since I've read it, and I forget certain things. And I'm like, oh, that's right. Snow Crash has a pretty graphic sex scene where somebody gets knocked out by a needle. It's kind of gross, or could be perceived as gross, depending on your perspective. Don't worry, the only person who gets hurt is a giant murder machine of a dude. Um, who's probably a psychopath. Well, it's hard to be sure. Snow Crash, it's fun. So yeah, with that, I'm gonna call it there. I say call it. I'm gonna start momentarily. I'm just gonna get a quick sip of water, and then yeah, I've gotta keep track of all the voices that I'm gonna have to do. I have some of them set aside. Well, I hope you dig Snow Crash, and I hope you dig Hyperion and the Fall of Hyperion. The structure of the first book I find to be absolutely flawless. Like I would change nothing in the first book. Every time I've read through these two, I get to the second book and it's like the change of pacing really throws me and I'm like, "Wait, what's going on?" Even though it makes perfect sense. It's all like, "Oh, oh, oh, that's what's happening." Okay. That's where we are, but it takes me a minute. Um anyway, with that, sit down, strap in, buckle up, and away we go. Hyperion by Dan Simmons. This is for Ted. Prologue. The Already off to a bad start. I'm so sorry. Prologue. The hegemony consul sat on the balcony of his ebony spaceship, and played Rachmaninoff's prelude in C sharp minor on an ancient but well maintained Steinway, while great green saurian things surged and bellowed in the swamps below. A thunderstorm was brewing to the north. Bruise-black clouds silhouetted a forest of giant gymnosperms, while stratocumulus towered 9 kilometers high in a violent sky. Lightning rippled along the horizon. Closer to the ship, occasional vague reptilian shapes would blunder into the interdiction field, cry out, and then crash away through indigo mists. The consul concentrated on a difficult section of the prelude, and ignored the approach of storm and nightfall. The fat line receiver chimed. The consul stopped, fingers hovering above the keyboard, and listened. Thunder rumbled through the heavy air. From the direction of the gymnosperm forest there came the mournful ululation of a carrion breed pack. Somewhere in the darkness below a small-brained beast trumpeted its answering challenge and fell quiet. The interdiction field added its sonic undertones to the sudden silence. The fat line chimed again. "Damn," said the consul, and went in to answer it. While the computer took a few seconds to convert and decode the burst of decaying tachyons, the consul poured himself a glass of scotch. He settled into the cushions of the projection pit just as the disk key blinked green. "Play," he said. "You have been chosen to return to Hyperion," came a woman's husky voice. Full visuals had not yet formed. The air remained empty except for the pulse of transmission codes which told the console that this fatline squirt had originated on the hegemony administrative world of Tau Ceti Center. The console did not need the transmission coordinates to know this. The aged but still beautiful voice of Mina Gladstone was unmistakable. It might be Mena, M-E-I-N-A. I'm saying Mina.
You have been chosen to return to Hyperion as the member of the Shrike Pilgrimage, continued the voice.
The hell you say, thought the consul, and rose to leave the pit.
You and 6 others have been selected by the Church of the Shrike and confirmed by the All Thing,
said Mina Gladstone.
It is in the interest of the hegemony that you accept.
The consul stood motionless in the pit, his back to the flickering transmission codes. Without turning, he raised his glass and drained the last of the scotch.
The situation is very confused, said Mina Gladstone.
Her voice was weary.
The consulate and the Home Rule Council fatlined us 3 standard weeks ago with the news that the time tombs showed signs of opening. The anti-entropic fields around them were expanding rapidly, and the Shrike has begun ranging as far south as the Bridle Range.
The consul turned and dropped into the cushions. A hollow had formed of Mina Gladstone's ancient face. Her eyes looked as tired as her voice sounded.
A Force Space Task Force was immediately dispatched from Parvati to evacuate the hegemony citizens on Hyperion before the time tombs open. Their time debt will be a little more than 3 Hyperion years.
Mina Gladstone paused. The consul thought he had never seen the Senate CEO look so grim.
We do not know if the evacuation fleet will arrive in time, she said, but the situation is even more complicated. An ouster migration cluster of at least 4,000 units has been detected approaching the Hyperion system. Our evacuation task force should arrive only a short while before the ousters.
The consul understood Gladstone's hesitation. An ouster migration cluster might consist of ships ranging in size from single-person ram scouts to can cities and comet forts, holding tens of thousands of the interstellar barbarians.
The Force Joint Chiefs believe that this is the ousters' big push, said Mina Gladstone.
The ship's computer had positioned the hollow so that the woman's sad brown eyes seemed to be staring directly at the consul.
Whether they seek to control just Hyperion for the time tombs, or whether this is an all-out attack on the world web, remains to be seen. In the meantime, a full Force Space battle fleet, complete with a Farcaster construction battalion, has spun up from the CAM system to join the evacuation task force, but this fleet may be recalled depending upon circumstances.
The consul nodded and absently raised the scotch to his lips. He frowned at the empty glass and dropped it onto the thick carpeting of the hollow pit. Even with no military training, he understood the difficult tactical decision Gladstone and the Joint Chiefs were faced with. Unless a military Farcaster were hurriedly constructed in the Hyperion system, at staggering expense, there would be no way to resist the ouster invasion. Whatever secrets the time tombs might hold would go to the hegemony's enemy. That rhymes. If the fleet did construct a Farcaster in time and the hegemony committed the total resources of force to defending the single distant colony world of Hyperion, the world web ran the terrible risk of suffering an ouster attack elsewhere on the perimeter, or, in a worst-case scenario, having the barbarians actually seizing the Farcaster and penetrating the web itself. The consul tried to imagine the reality of armored ouster troops stepping through Farcaster portals into the undefended home cities on 100 worlds. The consul walked through the hollow of Mina Gladstone, retrieved his glass, and went to pour another scotch.
You have been chosen to join the pilgrimage to the Shrike, said the image of the old CEO whom the press loved to compare to Lincoln, or Churchill, or Alvarez Tomp, or whatever other pre-Hedgera legend was in historical vogue at the time. The Templars are sending their tree ship Yggdrasil, said Gladstone, and the evacuation task force commander has instructions to let it pass. With a 3-week time debt, you can rendezvous with the Yggdrasil before it goes quantum from the Parvati system. The 6 other pilgrims chosen by the Shrike Church will be aboard the tree ship. Our intelligence reports suggest that at least one of the 7 pilgrims is an agent of the ousters. We do not, at this time, have any way of knowing which one it is. The consul had to smile. Among all the other risks Gladstone was taking, the old woman had to consider the possibility that he was the spy, and that she was fatlining crucial information to an ouster agent. Or had she given him any crucial information? The fleet movements were detectable as soon as the ships used their hawking drives, and if the consul were the spy, the CEO's revelation might be a way to scare him off. The consul's smile faded, and he drank his scotch. Saul Weintraub and Fedman Cassad are among the 7 pilgrims chosen, said Gladstone. The consul's frown deepened. He stared at the cloud of digits flickering like dust motes around the old woman's image. 15 seconds of fat line transmission time remained. We need your help, said Maina Gladstone. It is essential that the secrets of the time tombs and the Shrike be uncovered. This pilgrimage may be our last chance. If the ousters conquer Hyperion, their agent must be eliminated and the time tombs sealed at all cost. The fate of the hegemony may depend upon it. The transmission ended except for the pulse of rendezvous coordinates. Response? Asked the ship's computer. Despite the tremendous energies involved, the spacecraft was capable of placing a brief, coded squirt into the incessant babble of FTL bursts which tied the human portions of the galaxy together. No, said the consul, and went outside to lean on the balcony railing. Night had fallen, and the clouds were low. No stars were visible. The darkness would have been absolute except for the intermittent flash of lightning to the north, and a soft phosphorescence rising from the marshes. The consul was suddenly very aware that he was, at that second, the only sentient being on an unnamed world. He listened to the antediluvian night sounds rising from the swamps, and he thought about morning, about setting out in the Viken EMV at first light, about spending the day in sunshine, about hunting big game in the fern forests to the south, and then returning to the ship in the evening for a good steak and a cold beer. The consul thought about the sharp pleasure of the hunt and the equally sharp solace of solitude. Solitude he had earned through the pain and nightmare he had already suffered on Hyperion. Hyperion. The consul went inside, brought the balcony in, and sealed the ship just as the first heavy raindrops began to fall. He climbed the spiral staircase to his sleeping cabin at the apex of the ship. To his sleeping cabin, not sleeping cabin. A sleeping cabin means the cabin is asleep. Sorry, I got sidetracked. He climbed the spiral staircase to his sleeping cabin at the apex of the ship. The circular room was dark except for silent explosions of lightning which outlined rivulets of rain coursing the skylight. The consul stripped, lay back on the firm mattress, and switched on the sound system and external audio pickups. He listened as the fury of the storm blended with the violence of Wagner's Flight of the Valkyries. Hurricane winds buffeted the ship. The sound of thunderclaps filled the room as the skylight flashed white, leaving afterimages burning in the consul's retinas. Wagner is good only for thunderstorms, he thought. He closed his eyes, but the lightning was visible through closed eyelids. He remembered the glint of ice crystals blowing through the tumbled ruins on the low hills near the time tombs, and the colder gleam of steel on the Shrike's impossible tree of metal thorns. He remembered screams in the night at and the hundred-facet, ruby-and-blood gaze of the Shrike itself. Hyperion. The consul silently commanded the computer to shut off all speakers and raised his wrist to cover his eyes. In the sudden silence he lay thinking about how insane it would be to return to Hyperion. During his 11 years as consul on that distant and enigmatic world, the mysterious Church of the Shrike had allowed a dozen barges of off-world pilgrims to depart for the wind-swept barrens around the Time Tombs, north of the mountains. No one had returned. And that had been in normal times, when the Shrike had been prisoner to the tides of time and forces no one understood, and the anti-entropic fields had been contained to a few dozen meters around the Time Tombs. And there had been no threat of an ouster invasion. The consul thought of the Shrike, free to wander everywhere on Hyperion, of the millions of indigenes and thousands of hegemony citizens, helpless before a creature which defied physical laws, and which communicated only through death, and he shivered despite the warmth of the cabin. Hyperion. The night and storm passed. Another storm front raced ahead of the approaching dawn. Gymnosperms 200 meters tall bent and whipped before the coming torrent. Just before first light, the consul's ebony spaceship rose on a tail of blue plasma and punched through thickening clouds as it climbed toward space and rendezvous.
Chapter 1.
The consul awoke with the peculiar headache, dry throat, and sense of having forgotten 1,000 dreams which only periods in cryogenic fugue could bring. He blinked, sat upright on a low couch, and groggily pushed away the last sensor tapes clinging to his skin. There were two very short crew clones and one very tall, hooded Templar with him in the windowless ovoid of a room. One of the clones offered the consul the traditional post-thaw glass of orange juice. He accepted it and drank greedily. "The tree is 2 light minutes and 5 hours of travel from Hyperion," said the Templar, and the consul realized that he was being addressed by Het Mastine, captain of the Templar tree ship and true voice of the tree. The consul vaguely realized that it was a great honor to be awakened by the captain, but he was too groggy and disoriented from fugue to appreciate it. "The others have been awake for some hours," said Het Mastine, and gestured for the clones to leave them. "They have assembled on the foremost dining platform." said the consul, and took a drink. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Thank you, Het Mastine," he managed. Looking around at the egg-shaped room with its carpet of dark grass, translucent walls, and support ribs of continuous, curved weirwood, the consul realized that he must be in one of the smaller environment pods. Closing his eyes, he tried to recall his memories of rendezvous just before the Templar ship went quantum. The consul remembered his first glimpse of the kilometer-long tree ship as he closed for rendezvous, the tree ship's details blurred by the redundant machine and erg-generated containment fields which surrounded it like a spherical mist, but its leafy bulk clearly ablaze with thousands of lights which shone softly through leaves and thin-walled environment pods, or along countless platforms, bridges, command decks, stairways, and bowers. Around the base of the tree ship, engineering and cargo spheres clustered like oversized galls, while blue and violet drive streamers trailed behind like 10-kilometer-long roots. "The others await," Het Mastine said softly, and nodded toward low cushions where the consul's luggage lay ready to open upon his command. The Templar gazed thoughtfully at the weirwood rafters while the consul dressed in semi-formal evening wear of loose black trousers, polished ship boots, a white silk blouse which ballooned at waist and elbows, a topaz collar cinch, black demi-coat complete with slashes of hegemony crimson on the epaulets, and a soft gold tricorn. A section of curved wall became a mirror, and the consul stared at the image there. A more than middle-aged man in semi-formal evening wear, sunburned skin but oddly pale under the sad eyes. The consul frowned, nodded, and turned away. Hetmastine gestured, and the consul followed the tall, robed figure through a dilation in the pod onto an ascending walkway which curved up and out of sight around the massive bark wall of the tree ship's trunk. The consul paused, moved to the edge of the walkway, and took a quick step back. It was at least 600 meters down. Down being created by the 1/6 standard gravity being generated by the singularities imprisoned at the base of the tree, and there were no railings. They resumed their silent ascent, turning off from the main trunk walkway 30 meters and half a trunk spiral later to cross a flimsy suspension bridge to a 5-meter wide branch. They followed this outward to where the riot of leaves caught the glare of Hyperion's sun. "Has my ship been brought out of storage?" asked the consul. "It is fueled and ready in Sphere 11," said Hetmastine. They passed into the shadow of the trunk, and stars became visible in the black patches between the dark latticework of leaves. "The other pilgrims have agreed to ferry down in your ship if the Force authorities give permission," added the Templar. The consul rubbed his eyes and wished that he had been allowed more time to retrieve his wits from the cold grip of cryonic fugue. "You've been in touch with the task force?" "Oh, yes, we were challenged the moment we tunneled down from Quantum Leap. A hegemony warship is escorting us this very moment." Hetmastine gestured toward a patch of sky above them. The consul squinted upward, but at that second segments of the upper tiers of branches revolved out of the tree ship's shadow, and acres of leaves ignited in sunset hues. Even in the still shadowed places, glow-birds nestled like Japanese lanterns above lighted walkways, glowing swing vines and illuminated hanging bridges, while fireflies from old Earth and radiant gossamers from Maui Covenant blinked and coded their way through labyrinths of leaves, mixing with constellations sufficiently to fool even the most star-wise traveler. Hetmastine stepped into a basket lift hanging from a whiskered carbon cable, which disappeared into the 300 meters of tree above them. The consul followed, and they were borne silently upward. He noted that the walkways, pods, and platforms were conspicuously empty, except for a few Templars and their diminutive crew clone counterparts. The consul could recall seeing no other passengers during his rushed hour between rendezvous and fugue, but he had put that down to the imminence of the tree ship going quantum, assuming that the passengers were safe in their fugue couches. Now, however, the tree ship was traveling far below relativistic velocities, and its branches should be crowded with gawking passengers. He mentioned his observation to the Templar. "The 6 of you are our only passengers," said Hetmastine. The basket stopped in a maze of foliage, and the tree ship captain led the way up a wooden escalator worn with age. The consul blinked in surprise. A Templar tree ship normally carried between 2 and 5,000 passengers. It was easily the most desirable way to travel between the stars. Tree ships rarely accrued more than a 4 or 5 month time debt, making short, scenic crossings where star systems were a very few light years apart, thus allowing their affluent passengers to spend as little time as necessary in fugue. For the tree ship to make the trip to Hyperion and back, accumulating 6 years of web time with no paying passengers, would mean a staggering financial loss to the Templars. Then the consul realized, belatedly, that the tree ship would be ideal for the upcoming evacuation, its expenses ultimately to be reimbursed by the hegemony. Still, the consul knew, to bring a ship as beautiful and vulnerable as the Yggdrasil, one of only 5 of its kind, into a war zone was a terrible risk for the Templar Brotherhood. "Your fellow pilgrims," announced Het Mastine as he and the consul emerged onto a broad platform where a small group waited at one end of a long wooden table. Above them the stars burned, rotating occasionally as the tree ship changed its pitch or yaw, while to either side a solid sphere of foliage curved away like the green skin of some great fruit. The consul immediately recognized the setting as the captain's dining platform, even before the 5 other passengers rose to let Het Mastine take his place at the head of the table. The consul found an empty chair waiting for him to the left of the captain. When everyone was seated and quiet, Het Mastine made formal introductions. Although the consul knew none of the others from personal experience, several of the names were familiar, and he used his diplomat's long training to file away identities and impressions. To the consul's left sat Father Lenar Hoyt, a priest of the old-style Christian sect known as Catholic. For a second the consul had forgotten the significance of the black clothing and Roman collar, but then he remembered St. Francis Hospital on Hebron, where he had received alcohol trauma therapy after his disastrous first diplomatic assignment there almost 4 standard decades earlier. And at the mention of Hoyt's name he remembered another priest, one who had disappeared on Hyperion halfway through his own tenure there. Lenar Hoyt was a young man by the consul's reckoning, no more than his early 30s, but it appeared that something had aged the man terribly in the not-too-distant past. The consul looked at the thin face, cheekbones pressing against sallow flesh, eyes large but hooded in deep hollows, thin lips set in a permanent twitch of muscle too downturned to be called even a cynical smile, the hairline not so much receding as ravaged by radiation, and he felt he was looking at a man who had been ill for years. Still, the consul was surprised that behind that mask of concealed pain there remained the physical echo of the boy in the man, the faintest remnants of the round face, fair skin, and soft mouth which had belonged to a younger, healthier, less cynical Lenar Hoyt. Next to the priest sat a man whose image had been familiar to most citizens of the hegemony some years before. The consul wondered if the collective attention span in the world web was as short now as it had been when he had lived there. Shorter, probably. If so, then Colonel Fedman Kassad, the so-called Butcher of South Brescia, was probably no longer either infamous or famous. To the consul's generation, and to all those who lived in the slow expatriate fringe of things, Kassad was not someone one was likely to forget. Colonel Fedman Kassad was tall, almost tall enough to look the 2-meter Het Mastine in the eye, and dressed in force black with no rank insignia or citations showing. Sorry, someone's pinging me on Steam, and I'm just turning off the distraction. The black uniform was oddly similar to Father Hoyt's garb, but there was no real resemblance between the 2 men. In lieu of Hoyt's wasted appearance, Kassad was brown, obviously fit, and whip-handle lean, with strands of muscle showing in shoulder, wrist, and throat. The colonel's eyes were small, dark, and as all-encompassing as the lenses of some primitive video camera. His face was all angles, shadows, planes, and facets. Not gaunt like Father Hoyt's, merely carved from cold stone. A thin line of beard along his jawline served to accent the sharpness of his countenance as surely as blood on a knife blade. The colonel's intense, slow movements reminded the consul of an earth-bred jaguar he had seen in a private seed ship zoo on Lucis many years before. Kassad's voice was soft, but the consul did not fail to notice that even the colonel's silences commanded attention. that even the colonel's silences commanded attention. There we go. Some of these sentences are kind of long, so occasionally I'm going to get lost in the sauce because I can only read ahead so far without having long gaps between lines and sentences. Most of the long table was empty, the group clustered at one end. Across from Fedman Cassad sat a man introduced as the poet Martin Silenus. Silenus appeared to be quite the opposite of the military man across from him. Where Cassad was lean and tall, Martin Silenus was short and visibly out of shape. Countering Cassad's stone-cut features, the poet's face was as mobile and expressive as an Earth primate's. His voice was a loud, profane rasp. There was something, thought the consul, almost pleasantly demonic about Martin Silenus, with his ruddy cheeks, broad mouth, pitched eyebrows, sharp ears, and constantly moving hands sporting fingers long enough to serve a concert pianist. Or a strangler. The poet's silver hair had been cropped into rough-hewn bangs. Martin Silenus seemed to be in his late 50s, but the consul noticed the telltale blue tinge to throat and palms, and suspected that the man had been through more than a few Poulsen treatments. Silenus's true age might be anywhere from 90 to 150 standard years. If he were close to the latter age, the consul knew, the odds were that the poet was quite mad. As boisterous and animated as Martin Silenus seemed upon first encounter, so the next guest at the table exuded an immediate and equally impressive sense of intelligent reticence. Saul Weintraub looked up upon introduction, and the consul noted the short gray beard, lined forehead, and sad, luminous eyes of the well-known scholar. The consul had heard tales of the wandering Jew and his hopeless quest, but he was shocked to realize that the old man now held the infant in his arms. His daughter Rachel, no more than a few weeks old. The consul looked away. The sixth pilgrim, and the only woman at the table, was Braun Lamia. When introduced, the detective stared at the consul with such intensity that he could feel the pressure of her gaze even after she looked away. A former citizen of the 1.3G world of Lucis, Braun Lamia was no taller than the poet 2 chairs to her right, but even her loose corduroy ship suit did not conceal the heavy layers of muscle on her compact form. Black curls reached to her shoulders, her eyebrows were 2 dark lines dabbed horizontally across a wide brow, and her nose was solid and sharp, intensifying the aquiline quality of her stare. Lamia's mouth was wide and expressive to the point of being sensuous, curled slightly at the corners in a slight smile which might be cruel or merely playful. The woman's dark eyes seemed to dare the observer to discover which was the case. It occurred to the consul that Braun Lamia might well be considered beautiful. Introductions completed, the consul cleared his throat and turned toward the Templar. Hetmastine, you said there were 7 pilgrims. Is M. Weintraub's child the 7th? Okay, so I do actually have to interject here. So, because it's the future, um, and I can think of no reasonable other explanation for this, um, before everyone's name, there will be an M. It's basically the equivalent of Mr. or Mrs. or Ms. It's whatever you call that, one of those introductory title things. But it's only M period. So I'm just gonna say M Weintraub. I'm not gonna do Misser, Messer, Ms. I'm not gonna do any of that. Just M. It's a letter. I'm doing it. You're going to get this before basically everyone who doesn't have an official position, which is basically all the time. So the colonel will generally be Colonel Cassad as opposed to M. Cassad. Uh, Hetmastine will usually be the captain. Consul will be the consul. Um, Martin will be M. Salinas, that sort of thing. Where was I? Oh, yes.
Introductions completed, the consul cleared his throat and turned toward the Templar.
Het Mastine, you said there were 7 pilgrims. Is M. Weintraub's child the 7th?
Het Mastine's hood moved slowly from side to side.
No. Only those who make a conscious decision to seek the Shrike may be counted among the pilgrims.
The group at the table stirred slightly. Each must know what the consul knew. Only a group comprising a prime number of pilgrims might make the Shrike Church sponsored trip north.
I am the 7th, said Het Mastine, captain of the Templar tree ship Yggdrasil, and true voice of the tree.
In the silence which followed the announcement, Het Mastine gestured, and a group of crew clones began serving the pilgrims their last meal before planetfall.
So the ousters are not in system yet? Asked Braun Lamia.
Her voice had a husky, throaty quality which strangely stirred the consul.
No, said Het Mastine, but we cannot be more than a few standard days ahead of them. Our instruments have detected fusion skirmishes within the system's Oort cloud.
Will there be war?
Asked Father Hoyt. His voice seemed as fatigued as his expression. When no one volunteered a response, the priest turned to his right as if retroactively directing the question to the consul. The consul sighed. The crew clones had served wine. He wished it had been whiskey.
Who knows what the ousters will do, he said. They no longer appear to be motivated by human logic.
Martin Silenus laughed loudly, spilling his wine as he gestured.
As if we fucking humans were ever motivated by human logic.
He took a deep drink, wiped his mouth, and laughed again. Braun Lamia frowned.
If the serious fighting starts too soon, she said, perhaps the authorities will not allow us to land.
We will be allowed to pass,
said Het Mastine. Sunlight found its way past folds in his cowl to fall on yellowish skin.
Save from certain death in war to be delivered to certain death at the hands of the Shrike,
murmured Father Hoyt.
There is no death in all the universe,
intoned Martin Silenus in a voice which the consul felt sure could have awakened someone deep in cryogenic fugue. The poet drained the last of his wine and raised the empty goblet in an apparent toast to the stars.
No smell of death, there shall be no death. Moan, 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 Sibyl, moan, for thy pernicious babes have changed a god into a shaken palsy. Moan, brethren, moan, for I have no strength left. Weak as the reed, weak, feeble as my voice. Oh, oh, the pain of feebleness. Moan, moan, for I still fall.
Silenus abruptly broke off and poured more wine, belching once into the silence which had followed his recitation. The other 6 looked at one another. The consul noticed that Saul Weintraub was smiling slightly until the baby in his arms stirred and distracted him.
Well,
said Father Hoyt hesitantly, as if trying to retrieve an earlier strand of thought,
if the hegemony convoy leaves and the ousters take Hyperion, perhaps the occupation will be bloodless and they'll let us go about our business.
Colonel Fedman Cassad laughed softly. The ousters don't want to occupy Hyperion, he said. If they take the planet, they'll loot what they want and then do what they do best. They'll burn the cities into charred rubble, break the rubble into smaller pieces, and then bake the pieces until they glow. They'll melt the poles, boil the oceans, and then use the residue to salt what's left of the continents, so nothing will ever grow there again.
Well,
began Father Hoyt, and then trailed off. There was no conversation as the clones cleared the soup and salad dishes and brought on the main course. You said that there was a hegemony warship escorting us, the consul said to Het Mastine as they finished their roast beef and boiled sky squid. The Templar nodded and pointed. The consul squinted, but could make out nothing moving against the rotating starfield. Here, said Fedman Kassad, and leaned across Father Hoyt to hand the consul a collapsible pair of military binoculars. The consul nodded his thanks, thumbed on the power, and scanned the patch of sky Het Mastine had indicated. Gyroscopic crystals in the binoculars hummed slightly as they stabilized the optics and swept the area in a programmed search pattern. Suddenly the image froze, blurred, expanded, and steadied. The consul could not avoid an involuntary intake of breath as the hegemony ship filled the viewer. Neither the expected field-blurred seed of a solo ram scout nor the bulb of a torch ship, the electronically outlined image was of a matte black attack carrier. The thing was impressive in the way only warships through the centuries had succeeded in being. The hegemony spin ship was incongruously streamlined, with its 4 sets of boom arms retracted in battle readiness, its 60-meter command probe sharp as a Clovis point, and its hawking drive and fusion blisters set far back along the launch shaft, like feathers on an arrow. The consul handed the binoculars back to Kassad without comment. If the task force was using a full attack carrier to escort the Yggdrasil, what kind of firepower were they setting in place to meet the ouster invasion? How long until we land? Asked Braun Lamia. She had been using her comlog to access the tree ship's datasphere and obviously was frustrated with what she had found. Or had not found. 4 hours until orbit, murmured Het Mastine. A few minutes more by dropship. Our consular friend has offered his private craft to ferry you down. To Keats? Said Saul Weintraub. It was the first time the scholar had spoken since dinner had been served. The consul nodded. It's still the only spaceport on Hyperion set to handle passenger vehicles, he said. Spaceport? Father Hoyt sounded angry. I thought that we were going straight to the north, to the Shrike's realm. Het Mastine patiently shook his head. The pilgrimage always begins from the capital, he said. It will take several days to reach the time tombs. Several days? Snapped Braun Lamia. That's absurd. Perhaps, agreed Het Mastine, but it is the case, nonetheless. Father Hoyt looked as if something in the meal had caused him indigestion, even though he had eaten almost nothing. Look, he said, couldn't we change the rules this once? I mean, given the war scare and all, and just land near the time tombs or wherever and get it over with? The consul shook his head. Spacecraft and aircraft have been trying to take the short route to the northern moors for almost 400 years, he said. I know of none who made it. May one inquire, said Martin Silenus, happily raising his hand like a schoolboy, just what the gibbering fuck happens to these legions of ships? Father Hoyt frowned at the poet. Fedman Kassad smiled slightly. Saul Weintraub said, The consul didn't mean to suggest that the area is inaccessible. One may travel by ship or various land routes, nor do spacecraft and aircraft disappear. They easily land near the ruins or time tombs, and just as easily return to whatever point their computers command. It is merely the pilots and passengers who are never seen again. Weintraub lifted the sleeping baby from his lap and set her in an infant carrier slung around his neck.
So the tired old legend goes, said Braun Lamia. What do the ship's logs show?
Nothing, said the consul. No violence, no forced entry, no deviation from course, no unexplained time lapses, no unusual energy emissions or depletions, no physical phenomena of any sort. No passengers, said Het Mastine. The consul did a slow double take. If Het Mastine had, indeed, just attempted a joke, it was the first sign in all of the consul's decades of dealing with the Templars that one of them had shown even a nascent sense of humor. What the consul could see of the captain's vaguely oriental features beneath the cowl gave no hint that a joke had been attempted.
Marvelous melodrama, laughed Silenus. A real life Chris Christ weeping Sargasso of souls, and we're for it. Who orchestrates this shitpot of a plot anyway?
Shut up, said Braun Lamia. You're drunk, old man. The consul sighed. The group had been together for less than a standard hour. Crew clones swept away the dishes and brought dessert trays showcasing sherbets, coffees, tree ship fruits, drowms, torts, and concoctions made of Renaissance chocolate. That's with a capital R. It's a planet. We'll get there. we'll get to that later. I'm not going to be able to say this uses capital letters for everything because, like, I swear half the text uses capital letters for things, and I'm just not gonna call it out every time. There's been several. I don't actually know what force stands for. FORCE. I don't know off the top of my head. It doesn't matter. They're the militant wing of the web, the hegemony. Martin Silenus waved away the desserts and told the clones to bring him another bottle of wine. The consul reflected a few seconds and then asked for whiskey.
It occurs to me, Saul Weintraub said as the group was finishing dessert, that our survival may depend upon our talking to one another.
That was loud. I thought I had that turned silent. My sorries to all. I hope that's not important. That is important. Fortunately, I don't have to respond to it at this time. Excellent. Sorry about that. Let's just take this paragraph from the top. It occurs to me, Saul Weintraub said as the group was finishing dessert, that our survival may depend upon our talking to one another.
What do you mean? asked Braun Lamia.
Weintraub unconsciously rocked the child sleeping against his chest.
For instance, does anyone here know why he or she was chosen by the Shrike Church and the All Thing to go on this voyage?
No one spoke.
I thought not, said Weintraub. Even more fascinating, is anyone here a member or follower of the Church of the Shrike? I, for one, am a Jew, and however confused my religious notions have become these days, they do not include the worship of an organic killing machine.
Weintraub raised heavy eyebrows and looked around the table.
I am the true voice of the tree, said Het Mastine. While many Templars believe that the Shrike is the avatar of punishment for those who do not feed from the root, I must consider this a heresy not founded in the Covenant or the writings of Muir.
To the captain's left, the consul shrugged. I am an atheist, he said, holding the glass of whiskey to the light. I have never been in contact with the Shrike cult. Father Hoyt smiled without humor.
The Catholic Church ordained me, he said. Shrike worship contradicts everything the Church defends.
Colonel Cassad shook his head, whether in refusal to respond or to indicate that he was not a member of the Shrike Church, it was not clear. Martin Silenus made an expansive gesture. I was baptized Lutheran, he said, a subset which no longer exists. I helped create Zen Gnosticism before any of your parents were born. I have been a Catholic, a Revelationist, a neo-Marxist, an interface zealot, a bound shaker, a Satanist, a bishop in the Church of Jake's Nada, and a dues-paying subscriber to the Assured Reincarnation Institute. Now, I am happy to say I am a simple pagan. He smiled at everyone. To a pagan, he concluded, the Shrike is a most acceptable deity.
I ignore religions, said Braun Lamia. I do not succumb to them.
My point has been made, I believe, said Saul Weintraub. None of us admits to subscribing to the Shrike cult dogma, yet the elders of...
One sec, I just got lost. This is the difficulty with having to do like 6 voices in about as many lines, is I get lost.
None of us admits to subscribing to the Shrike cult dogma, yet the elders of that perceptive group have chosen us over many millions of the petitioning faithful to visit the time tombs and their fierce god in what may be the last such pilgrimage.
The consul shook his head. Your point may be made, M. Weintraub, he said, but I fail to see it.
The scholar absently stroked his beard. It would seem that our reasons for returning to Hyperion are so compelling that even the Shrike Church and the hegemony probability intelligences agree that we deserve to return, he said. Some of these reasons, mine for instance, may appear to be public knowledge, but I am certain that none are known in their entirety except to the individuals at this table. I suggest that we share our stories in the few days remaining to us.
Why, said Colonel Cassad, it would seem to serve no purpose.
Weintraub smiled. On the contrary, it would, at the very least, amuse us and give us at least a glimpse of our fellow travelers' souls before the Shrike or some other calamity distracts us. Beyond that, it might just give us enough insight to save all of our lives, if we are intelligent enough to find the common thread of experience which binds all our fates to the whim of the Shrike.
Martin Silenus laughed and closed his eyes. He said, straddling each a dolphin's back and steadied by a fin, those innocents relive their death, their wounds open again.
That's Lanista, isn't it? Said Father Hoyt. I studied her in seminary.
Close, said Silenus, opening his eyes and pouring more wine.
It's Yeats. Bugger lived 500 years before Lanista tugged at her mother's metal teat.
Look, said Lamia, what good would telling each other stories do? When we meet the Shrike, we tell it what we want. One of us is granted the wish, and the others die. Correct?
So goes the myth, said Weintraub.
The Shrike is no myth, said Cassad, nor its steel tree. So why bore each other with stories? Asked Braun Lamia, spearing the last of her chocolate cheesecake, and making me incredibly hungry in the process. Weintraub gently touched the back of his sleeping infant's head.
We live in strange times, he said. Because we are part of that 1/10 of 1/10 of 1% of the hegemony citizens who travel between the stars rather than along the web, we represent odd epochs of our own recent past. I, for example, am 68 standard years old, but because of the time debts my travels could have incurred, I might have spread these 68 years across well more than a century of hegemony history.
So? Said the woman next to him. Weintraub opened his hand in a gesture which included everyone at the table.
Among us, we represent islands of time as well as separate oceans of perspective.
Or perhaps more aptly put, each of us may hold a piece to a puzzle no one has been able to solve since humankind first landed on Hyperion. Weintraub scratched his nose. It is a mystery, he said, and to tell the truth, I am intrigued by mysteries, even if this is to be my last week of enjoying them. I would welcome some glimmer of understanding, but failing that, working on the puzzle will suffice. I agree, said Hetmastine with no emotion. It had not occurred to me, but I see the wisdom of telling our tales before we confront the Shrike.
But what's to keep us from lying? Asked Braun Lamia.
Nothing, Martin Silenus grinned. That's the beauty of it.
We should put it to a vote, said the consul. He was thinking about Maina Gladstone's contention that one of the group was an ouster agent. Would hearing the stories be a way of revealing the spy? The consul smiled at the thought of an agent so stupid.
Who decided that we are a happy little democracy? Colonel Cassad asked dryly.
We had better be, said the consul. To reach our individual goals, this group needs to reach the Shrike regions together. We require some means of making decisions.
We could appoint a leader, said Cassad.
Piss on that, the poet said in a pleasant tone. Others at the table also shook their heads. All right, said the consul. We vote. Our first decision relates to M. Weintraub's suggestion that we tell the stories of our past involvement with Hyperion.
All or nothing, said Hetmastine. We each share our story or none does. We will abide by the will of the majority.
Agreed, said the consul, suddenly so curious to hear the others tell their stories, and equally sure that he would never tell his own. Those in favor of telling our tales?
Yes, said Saul Weintraub.
Yes, said Hetmastine.
Absolutely, said Martin Silenus. I wouldn't miss this little comic farce for a month at the orgasm baths on Shote.
I vote yes also, said the consul, surprising himself. Those opposed?
Nay,
said Father Hoyt, but there was no energy in his voice. I think it's stupid, said Braun Lamia. The consul turned to Cassad. Colonel? Fedman Cassad shrugged. I register 4 yes votes, 2 negatives, and 1 abstention, said the consul. The ayes have it. Who wants to start? The table was silent. Finally, Martin Silenus looked up from where he had been writing on a small pad of paper. He tore a sheet into several smaller strips.
I've recorded numbers from 1 to 7, he said. Why don't we draw lots and go in the order we draw?
That seems rather childish, doesn't it? Said M. Lamia.
I'm a childish fellow,
responded Silenus with his satyr's smile.
Ambassador,
he nodded toward the consul.
Could I borrow that gilded pillow you're wearing for a hat?
The consul handed over his tricorn. The folded slips were dropped in, and the hat passed around. Saul Weintraub was the first to draw, Martin Silenus the last. The consul unfolded his slip, making sure that no one else could see it. He was number 7. Tension ebbed out of him like air out of an overinflated balloon. It was quite possible, he reasoned, that events would intercede before he had to tell his story. Or the war would make everything academic. Or the group could lose interest in stories. Or the king could die. Or the horse could die. Or he could teach the horse how to talk. No more whiskey, thought the consul.
Who's first?
Asked Martin Silenus. In the brief silence, the consul could hear leaves stirring to unfelt breezes.
I am,
said Father Hoyt. The priest's expression showed the same barely submerged acceptance of pain which the consul had seen on the faces of terminally ill friends. Hoyt held up his slip of paper with a large 1 clearly scrawled on it.
All right, said Silenus. Start.
Now, asked the priest.
Why not?
Said the poet. The only sign that Silenus had finished at least 2 bottles of wine was a slight darkening of the already ruddy cheeks and a somewhat more demonic tilt to the pitched eyebrows.
We have a few hours before landfall, he said, and I, for one, plan to sleep off the freezer fugue when we're safely down and settled among the simple natives.
Our friend has a point, Saul Weintraub said softly. If the tales are to be told, the hour after dinner each day is a civilized time to tell them. Father Hoyt sighed and stood. Just a minute, he said, and left the dining platform. After some minutes had passed, Braun Lamia said, Do you think he's lost his nerve? No, said Lenar Hoyt, emerging from the darkness at the head of the wooden escalator which served as the main staircase. I needed these. He dropped 2 small, stained notebooks on the table as he took his seat.
No fair reading stories from a primer, said Silenus. These are to be our own tall tales, Magus.
Shut up, damn it! Cried Hoyt. He ran a hand across his face, touched his chest. For the second time that night, the consul knew that he was looking at a seriously ill man. I'm sorry, said Father Hoyt, but if I'm to tell my tale, I have to tell someone else's story as well. These journals belong to the man who was the reason for my coming to Hyperion, and why I am returning today. Hoyt took a deep breath. The consul touched the journals. They were begrimed and charred, as if they had survived a fire. Your friend has old-fashioned tastes, he said, if he still keeps a written journal. Yes, said Hoyt. If you're all ready, I will begin. The group at the table nodded. Beneath the dining platform, a kilometer of tree-ship drove through the cold night with the strong pulse of a living thing. Saul Weintraub lifted his sleeping child from the infant carrier and carefully set her on a cushioned mat on the floor near his chair. He removed his comlog, set it near the mat, and programmed the disk key for white noise. The week-old infant lay on her stomach and slept. The consul leaned far back and found the blue and green star which was Hyperion. It seemed to grow larger even as he watched. Het Mastine drew his cowl forward until only shadows showed for his face. Saul Weintraub lighted a pipe. Others accepted refills of coffee and settled back in their chairs. Martin Silenus seemed the most avid and expectant of the listeners as he leaned forward and whispered,
He said, Sin I shall begin the game. What, welcome be the cut, a God's name. Now let us ride, and hearkeneth what I say. And with that word we riden forth our way, and he began with right a merry cheer, his tale anon, and said, as ye may hear.
And with that, I think we'll call it for the week, because this next one I do not want to interrupt in the middle. The tales really, really do have to be on their separate thing. I've decided that as I'm reading. So that is our introduction to Hyperion, the prologue and the first part of the first chapter. Um, and next week we will start with The Priest's Tale, The Man Who Cried God. There's a lot of religion in this, but it's an interesting take. Interesting takes, plural, on certain religious ideas. I find it deeply entertaining. So yeah, a very short one this week. Next week will be a bit more of the accustomed size, probably 2.5 hours. This is going by about the speed I was expecting, page-wise, per minute. I was hoping it would last a little longer for 20 pages, but it's fine. So I will endeavor to make sure these are singular. I'll try not to break it up much, and I'm getting verdicts in here. Um, in terms of, to answer your question, I'd prefer you stick with one storyline at a time. Helps with the immersion, absolutely. I will not pound straight into Endymion. There's a big time gap between the Hyperion Cantos and the Endymion cycle duology. It's another 2 books. It's Endymion and the Rise of Endymion. That, oh my god, Endymion is wild. Hyperion is nuts. Endymion is wild. like, mostly because it helps to recontextualize or further contextualize everything you know about the Hyperion universe. It's great. It's brilliant. It's beautiful. It's wondrous. I will get around to it at some point. I can't promise it'll be this year. Um, so yeah, we're calling it for now. And yeah, next week we will do The Priest's Tale. Hope people are enjoying it. This is but the beginning of the journey, and it feels like the beginning of a journey. It's kind of like reading um, a really good D&D campaign, actually. Actually, in terms of really good D&D campaigns as books, um, I really have to get around to reading the Warded Man series aloud by Peter V. Brett, I believe his name is. That one's quite entertaining. It reads out exactly like a D&D campaign. It's great, except without the dice rolls. It gets a little more soap opera-y to later on, but it recovers. Still very good. Um, the first book I definitely feel is worth reading. Um, but yeah, I definitely urge people to go out and get a copy of Hyperion or the Hyperion Cantos. Um, Hyperion Cantos has both book 1 and 2. Hyperion and the Fall of Hyperion. I have an old edition. I'll wind up showing a bit of cover art for that at some point. But yeah, with that, we's gonna scooch, and yeah, just a little taster today. Next week is the real deal. All right, to anyone tuning in after the fact, not live, I do broadcast these live, hence why they're so rough. Um, I do it live at about noon Eastern Standard Time every Friday. I have other streams throughout the week. I've got a Mecha Mondays stream where I do something giant robot related or mecha adjacent. At the start of the new year, I am planning on doing a bit of a change to the formula on that. It'll still be mecha adjacent stuff, but we'll be reading books. So that'll be fun because I've got a fairly sizable collection of mecha literature or stuff I would put reasonably under that general umbrella, as it were. So I'm planning on doing that. A bit of a change in format next year. I also have a Warframe Wednesday stream, which is also subject to change. It's not always Warframe. I'm going to probably use that as my float stream where I'll just do different things. Probably just other books in the midst. Or if I really feel like I need to expedite doing the Hyperion Cantos, we might start strapping that in there. I'm also planning on doing a change up to my general numbering format. Um, I'm going to switch to making every year a season, as it were, because this will make it so that there aren't playlists that are 400 titles long, 400 vids long, 200 vids long. So it'll basically it'll be like basically everything up until like the start of next year will be season 1, for lack of a better term, and then I'll make it season 2 so it's divvied up a bit more. The Warframe ones I might leave accordingly because I just stick a date on those. I don't really care about continuity there. I care a little bit about continuity with the Mecha Mondays and the Free Read Fridays. But with that, so far it looks like my work schedule is stabilized for the foreseeable. So we should be able to be on schedule for most things. With that, I gotta run. Thanks for tuning in. Stay safe, stay sane, and be decent to each other. Thanks again. See y'all next time.